Hello, and welcome to the Catching the Octopus podcast. Here, we will explore how connecting inward gives us an advantage outward. We openly talk about the obstacles and challenges and difficulties that life throws our way and how they become moments of gratitude and things that can benefit us when we look back on our lives. I'm your host, Niomi Hurley, and it is my mission to bring you top quality guests that will share with you openly their obstacles and also the techniques they use to go inward that strengthens the way that they serve themselves and others at the highest level. Thank you for joining. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Catching the Octopus podcast. In today's episode, we're going to do a recap on the interview that I had with Amy Jacobson. Now, Amy is amazing, and the interview was so great. I really, again, as always, recommend you going and having a listening because she came up with some really great points around emotional intelligence. And she's an emotional intelligence specialist. She's also a published author, and her book, Emotional Intelligence, is filled with some great gold nuggets as well. But, you know, one of the first things she talked about was the willingness to learn. And that's our first step to opening up to that change within us, is learning different things. And it's not just about learning and getting tickets and certificates and all those sorts of things. It's being open to learn, not just about techniques and skills, but also about ourselves. Right? Because when we can learn and open up and learn about ourselves, and we've got some curiosity there, then that's what opens and gives us scope to be able to go into that space of emotional intelligence. And there's no real blueprint for it. It's not even about it should be this or it should be that. And Amy talks about moving past that blueprint of what it should look like, right? And being open, because emotional intelligence is something that's fluid. And it's something that feels right in different spaces for different individuals. And it's about finding our flow and finding our own space on where that feels comfortable for us, right? And as humans, it's recognizing as well that when we're interacting with other people, or when we've got a product to sell or a service to deliver, when we're in the space of doing that, we might not be the right fit for every person. And that's okay. And some people may rub us up the wrong way, but we may rub other people up the wrong way as well. And it's about not taking those things personally. It's about realizing that not everyone is the right fit for everyone else. Now, when we don't take it personally, that allows us to still be able to communicate well. Right? That allows us to still come into a place where we can influence, especially when it comes to members of our team, if we're in a leadership position. And from like probably an energy perspective, you know, when we are disgruntled by someone, when we are triggered by someone, when there's someone that we just don't like and we can't move past it in that emotional intelligence space, it's actually felt by others. Yes, it affects our verbal communication in the way that our tone is, in the way that we communicate, the words that we use. It also does affect our body language. You know, our face might screw up, or we might be less likely to make eye contact or just look disengaged. But also energetically, even if people aren't seeing those things, they will feel the conflict. And if you're a leader and there's someone in your team that you just feel like you can't gel with, by not coming from that open space and coming from the emotionally driven space, that other person's going to feel it, even if you think you're the best actor in the world, right? And when people feel an energy that's not consistent with the words or the messaging that they're saying, instantly on a really deep level, there's an amount of distrust. Right? We don't trust those people. And I'm sure you can think of people that you've come in contact with during your lifetime that have done just that. They've said all the right things and they've, you know, even acted a lot of the times in the right ways, but there's just something that's just not right and you can't put your finger on it. Right? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, don't you? So showing that space of accepting that not everyone is going to be BFFs, and that's okay. But that doesn't mean we still can't be mature, and we still have the ability from that space to become really effective leaders and still influence the people in our team effectively if we have an emotional intelligence that allows us to rise above that. And, Amy talked about with emotional intelligence showing how contagious emotions are. Right. So there's no bad emotions and there's no positive or negative in the way that Amy views things, but there is intensity of emotion. And it's the intensity of emotion that is what it is felt by other people. And that's what impacts us in the way that we think and behave. Right. Because we've already got the feel element. That's the emotion there. And that emotion and the thinking and the behaving, that's all really closely intertwined. If you've got, even in a behavioral aspect, if you do something that goes against your morals, you will feel bad about it and then you'll think about it and it'll be regret, shame and guilt, all of those sorts of things, right? So if you do something positive, you instantly feel good and then your thoughts are that, hey, it's great to help people, I'm a good person, etc. So all three of them are very closely linked. And when I have clients come in the RTT space, it's really interesting watching them piece all that together and have that realization of, so if I think in this particular way, those thoughts then lead to me to feeling this particular way. And when I'm thinking that, and then in turn feeling that, this is how I show up in the world. And so if we can mix that up a little bit and we can change the way we're thinking, which then affects the way we're feeling, then that then affects the way we show up in the world. And that's what emotional intelligence is about, right? It's about recognizing, oh, my emotion, what's going to be in control here? Are my emotions the things that are going to control me and affect my thoughts and behaviors? Or am I going to rise above that and go, not for me. I'm going to be the one that controls that. I'm going to think the right things that then creates the right emotional response that then creates the right behaviors. And Viktor Frankl talks about that gap, right? That gap between when something happens and our response to that or reaction to that. And there's a space in between there that we have the ability then to make decisions around. Am I going to show up and actually take control of this and come back in a responsive way? Or have I, am I going to let this control me and then just react? And in some cases, some people just don't have the awareness that they have that ability. And so they just go jumping straight into that reaction space. So Amy and I also talked about not putting on a false front, as people can pick that up. And that's very similar to what I was just saying before, right? About the energy that we put out. People know when other people aren't being authentic and true to themselves. And you can put on a false front to a certain extent, but if it's really incongruent with what your values are and who you are, people around you will see that. And so emotional intelligence isn't about pretending to be someone else. It's about being comfortable with who you are. And it's about showing up in a way that doesn't allow yourself to be triggered by the people around you. Or if you are triggered, you process that in a different space. And when you're in that leadership role, you come in the space of how you want to be, how you should be, not how your little voice inside you is telling you should be, right? It's just purely about keeping it real. And that's what I loved about the interview with Amy was that's what she was talking about the whole time is keeping it real, right? If you have an incident that you're involved in and you make a mistake, own it. And in her words, own your shit, right? Go into that space and just own it and keep it real and be open and honest and speak what's going on in your head. It's okay to say, I can't believe I just did that. I really can't believe I just did that. It's really embarrassing. That wasn't the right decision to make, or I just made a big error here. And jumping on things quickly and having those discussions quickly, because the longer you leave it, the more difficult, I can't even speak, sorry, the more difficult it is to have those conversations. And when you jump in early and you actually just speak it and you keep it real and you're authentic, then that's when other people recognize the trait in you that they can trust you. That's when your energy and your actions and your thoughts and your emotions are all aligned. And when they're all aligned, that's when you show up from your best space. We also talked about, sometimes we do have bad days and that's okay. Sometimes we get it wrong, especially from an emotional intelligence space, especially if we've got some pressures from other areas of our life that are pressing down on us. And it's okay to have a bad day, but like Amy says, don't stay and unpack there. Right? Sit in it, feel about it, talk about it, process it, and then make your way out of the other end of not being okay and come through and come back into the space of where you're showing up in the best way that you can at that time. And the thing about processing it and letting it through and talking about it and how important that is knowing if you don't, if we don't process the emotions that are coming through as they're coming through or in this moment, and we decide that, look, we need to suppress these, we've got stuff to get on with, we don't have time for this, just know that they'll come out at some point, right? And usually when they come out is when you least want them to. Okay, so as Amy was saying, if we're pushing it down and we keep pushing it down and something else happens and we're pushing it down, then we'll get to the point where it'll be just one little thing will just get us to erupt, right? It'll be like a pressure cooker going off. So we need to be okay with sitting down and processing the emotions that are coming through us.
If you're enjoying this podcast and you want Niomi or any of her guests featured on your podcast or as a keynote speaker at your next event, you'll find their contact details included in the show notes. If you'd like to learn more about how you can work with Niomi individually or as part of your strategy to improve leadership in your business, then review the courses, offers and services at getupandgoconsulting.com.au.
When we were talking about, speaking up when we've done something wrong and speaking up when something has happened where you've maybe made the wrong judgment or you've actually done the wrong thing in a particular space, we also spoke, or Amy also spoke about trying to cover it up. And when we try to cover something up, everyone knows. And that's what actually impacts trust. So one of the most emotionally intelligent things you can do is own your own mistakes. And then you stew on them less. You have less shame and guilt. And knowing that when you address it quickly, it's really easy to get everything back on track. The thing, though, that some people do is they try and justify the wrong in their head or they look for someone to blame it on, right? And all that does is put up defense mechanisms and barriers between you both. And there's nothing worse than knowing you're wrong, justifying the wrongness, standing by it with everything you have, and the people in the room bringing up really valid points that you're just disregarding, right? Because you're in that defensive mode and you've set up the barrier, and that doesn't allow for open communication. And it certainly impacts the psychologically safe space that you should be setting up as a leader with your team. Another thing that we spoke about was, as leaders, we're still human, right? And it's comforting for others when we show and model those right behaviors of how you do things and what you do when you get things wrong. So it's not even just about the trust element, although that's important, of how people view you, but it's also about that modeling space, right? It's about modeling to other people what the expectations are for behavior. What the expectations are when something does go wrong, of what you expect from your team, because they look to you to see what is the culture here, right? How do we handle these situations when they come up? And when we're dealing with different people, we're in a space where we've got a lot of different personalities. And when, especially at the start of my leadership program, when I'm talking with people in the workplace psychological safety module, and that's the first module of the program, when talking about creating a space that's psychologically safe, and we talk about psychosocial hazards, and that's the module where people bring up, oh, but this person, oh, but this person, oh, but this person, right? And talks about how difficult they are, how slack they are, how this they are, how that they are. And I let it go, and we have great conversations about that. And it's not until a couple of modules in that we then go back and revisit some of those comments and do some reframing about them, right? Because we see these spaces or these people as hindrances. But if we can adjust our style, right, if we can actually see them and as leaders adjust the way that we think, changing the way that we feel and behave, right? So if we change the way we think about something, then that allows us to feel connected or to become connected with the people that you're wanting to influence. Now, you don't have to be BFFs with everyone. You don't even have to socialize with everyone, right? But we just have to come from a space of being able to adapt our styles, because every person is individual and everyone's different. And, in that leadership program, we do go through the different roles that people play in life, and, the different the core needs that every person needs to meet. And we go through as well some of the Myers-Briggs testing to look at the different personalities, introverts and extroverts, and looking at how that's set up. And also we have a look at the 5 love languages, right? Because the 5 love languages go through and show us how different people feel valued. So once we're in a space where we understand that a bit better, and we're open to learning about different people and different ways that they show up, then as leaders, we can then adjust. And adjusting our style is really important for us to be able to influence all different people in our team. And even if we're, involved in the recruitment process for the people in our team, there's still going to be people that come in that aren't identical to everyone else, or that you may see in an interview are great. They're mint. You think, oh, I've got it done here. But then when they come into your team, they're a little bit different than what they showcased in their interview, right? And so especially in this day and age, when we're in a space where it's really hard to get people across every industry I've spoken to, I won't say every industry because I don't know that for sure, but majority of industries are finding it really difficult to find people. And so we need to be adjusting to the people in our team so that we can influence them to be able to get them to perform at a great level, and also help them feel supported and valued so that they don't just leave. Because every great leader really needs to be adaptable in that leadership space. So then Amy and I went and we talked about communication, right? And I loved what she said about that. She said the truth about communication is it's not about me, it's about them. And that goes back into that space I was just talking about, right? So when we're talking with someone and we communicate with them, we need to be reading the room. We need to be reading them and finding out what is connecting with them and what's not. And I know when I deliver, I definitely read the room, because I can go really deep on an esoteric level about all of the things in my program, or I can keep it really logical and really in the brain space. But what I need to do is read the room in front of me and see, where do these people sit? What's going to connect with them better? If I start bringing out hippie references, am I going to turn them off, right? Or if I'm just in that logical space and it's all about psychology, am I going to turn them off? And how do I sprinkle and sprinkle in both of those things in there so people really get to open their minds and create curiosity around the topics that we're talking about? So looking at when you're communicating with people, recognizing that it's not all about you. It's really about them. And that's where listening comes in, like really listening, not listening, waiting to respond, but really listening and hearing what the person has to say. And sometimes when we're communicating with someone, they can actually trigger us, right? And when they trigger us, if we don't have a grip of that emotional intelligence, we can go into a reaction space. But it's helpful then to identify, what are the things that trigger us? Is it a particular type of individual? Is it a particular behavior? Sometimes it's particular words or phrases or terms that are used that can trigger us. So recognizing, how am I feeling right now? Is that really the other person, or is that just me being triggered? And if it's you being triggered, then you can go into a space, right, that can create some change. Because let's be honest, the only thing that we have control over is us. And Amy says it really well. She said, you can't control other people. The only thing you can control is your own response. And we have the ability to control our mind and our thoughts, even though sometimes we may not believe that. But we have the ability to create the thoughts that we want to create. We can see someone and we can think they're a douchebag, or we can see someone and we can think, oh, they need a little bit extra help, right? That's totally up to us, and depends on how deeply we're letting ourselves get triggered. Because if we're getting triggered deeply, we're always going to see them as a douchebag. But if we can recognize that trigger, they're triggering me, I need to process this better, then you can be more open-minded. So our feelings, we get to control how we feel. A couple of weeks ago, my daughter actually said, oh, what you did made me so angry. And I said, well, you know what, honey, I didn't actually make you angry. What I did created anger in you, and you let that come through. And we sat down and we talked about that, because we very often as humans, we blame everyone else for our emotions. They make me happy. They make me sad. They make me angry. Well, you know what? They don't actually. You do. And a great example of that is, there's a time with everyone where you've been angry, like super angry, maybe swearing, maybe even throwing things. I don't know how deep your anger goes, right? But being really angry in a certain situation, whether it be at home or whether it be at work. And then the phone rings and you answer the phone and you're like, hello. And you've switched your anger off just like that. And then the terrible part is you get off the phone and you go, where was I? And bang, you switch the anger back on again straight away. Right. So we've all had that experience where we've actually exercised control over our emotions, but a lot of us don't recognize that. So we can control our thoughts, we can control our emotions, and we can control our behaviors. Right. Someone's being really triggering to us and we can choose to walk away. We can choose to yell. We can choose to let them know, look, I'm really busy right now. I really do value you. I think we need to revisit this, so you can disseminate the situation. You get to choose how you act. So that whole element of control in any situation, whether it's a personal issue, whether it's a work issue, whether you're a leader, whether it's people above you, whether it's clients coming and talking to you, you can't control any of them. You can't control anything about anyone. The only thing you can control is your own response and yourself. And if you learn to control your own response, and if you learn to control yourself, as in controlling your thoughts and your emotions and your behaviors, that is when you become a key influencer. That is when you are able to connect with people, even if they're not your cup of tea. Right? You can still connect with them and influence them and have empathy for them and help them grow and mentor them. And that is the key to an effective leader. So sometimes other things do pop up. And I know that Amy and I were still talking, about the approach that we use in this space. And one of the key things she said is you can't be textbook in your approach, because it's not a one size fits all. And I think in this recap, we've talked about that quite a bit and sprinkled that through, that people are human and everyone's an individual. So again, just confirming that space of reading the room, reading the other person, reading the people around you. And, as leaders, sometimes we feel like we just need to be busy and we just need to be doing things, and that's how we model. But sometimes nothing is more powerful than filling our time with something. And that's the same with communication, right? Sometimes silence is more powerful than filling that space with words. And we talk about that a fair bit in my leadership program as well. The power of silence and the power of questions. in one of the modules there that talks about communication. So in a key element, Amy did say, we need to learn to work smarter, not harder. And when we come into a space where we're creating curiosity, we're learning about ourselves, we're elevating our own emotional intelligence. We can also leverage the way that our brains are wired. And when we can leverage the way our brains are wired, we can then use that to work towards smarter outcomes, more strategic outcomes, more emotionally intelligent outcomes. So that's about it for the recap on Amy Jacobson. If you haven't read her book already, go and grab a copy. It's amazing. Jump on her website, go and have a look. If you're a business looking to elevate your emotional intelligence, then reach out to her and have a chat. If you wanted to learn in a little bite size, you can also sign up to the leadership psychology program called The Ripple Effect that I host as well, an online program. There is a module in there, but Amy goes super, super, super deep. So if you want something deep, she's definitely the person to speak with. So thank you very much for jumping in and listening to this recap episode. And if you haven't already, listen to the episode with Amy, and I look forward to serving you in our next episode. Thanks for joining in and listening to this episode of Catching the Octopus podcast. It's been great having you here. And if you'd like to go and like and subscribe and maybe even leave a 5-star rating if you think it's worth it, I'd really appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you in our next episode.